Imagine being kicked out of your home by the very person you raised, loved, and sacrificed for. After all those years of sleepless nights, hard work, and relentless devotion, to be told that you no longer matter. That's exactly what happened to Eleanor. Her heart sank as Marcus, her adopted son, slammed the eviction notice onto her kitchen table. The papers fluttered across the surface, falling like leaves in the wind. The world around her felt like it was closing in. "Pack your bags, old woman," Marcus sneered. "This house is mine now." Eleanor's trembling hands reached for the papers, her 70-year-old eyes scanning the words that would shatter everything she thought she knew. This was her home, the place where she had raised Marcus since he was just a boy, the place where she had poured all her love and sacrifices. She had given up her youth, her dreams, and even her comfort, all for him. But now, it seemed that none of that mattered. Her mind raced as steam rose from her untouched coffee cup, the silence in the kitchen almost deafening. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the end of an era. "I don't understand," Eleanor whispered. The words felt like they were slipping from her lips against her will. She couldn't believe it. After all the years of being his mother, of guiding him, loving him, this was how it ended? This was how he repaid her? "This is my home, Marcus. I've lived here since before you could walk," she continued, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Brittany, Marcus's wife, stood there with arms crossed, her perfectly styled blonde hair shimmering in the light. She looked at Eleanor as though she were an inconvenience. "Actually, it's not your house anymore," she said sharply, her words cutting through the air like ice. "The deed shows Marcus inherited this property from his biological mother. You're just a tenant who overstayed her welcome." The words hit Eleanor like a slap across the face. She had raised Marcus since he was 8, nurturing him, watching him grow from a scared little boy into the man standing before her. She had sacrificed everything, working long hours as a janitor to pay for his college, missing out on family vacations, on her own life, just to give him the future he deserved. And now this? She wasn't even family in his eyes anymore. Brittany's voice cut through her thoughts again, her tone dripping with superiority. "You're not even real family. Blood matters. Marcus has been supporting you long enough. It's time for you to go." The sting of those words was worse than anything Eleanor had ever experienced. She had heard whispers in the neighborhood, people talking about how she was just a charity case, taking advantage of Marcus's success. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know how hard she had worked, how much she had given up to make sure Marcus had a better life. They saw her as nothing more than a burden. But even as the pain and humiliation washed over her, Eleanor held on to her dignity. She knew this was not the end. She had survived harder things in her life. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'll be gone by Friday." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his face softening with a hint of regret. For just a second, Eleanor saw the son she once knew. But before she could speak, Brittany interrupted. "She's had 30 years of free housing. That's more than most people get." Eleanor nodded slowly. She had taught Marcus the value of kindness, respect, and family. She had shown him the importance of hard work and self-respect. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. People change, Eleanor thought, sometimes forgetting where they came from and who helped them get there. The neighbors watched as Eleanor packed her things. To them, she was just a quiet woman who kept to herself, the one who walked to the bus stop every morning in her cleaning uniform. They assumed she was living on Social Security, that Marcus was her only support. They didn't know the truth of her sacrifices, of the quiet strength she had always carried with her, hidden from the world. But soon, that would change. The morning after the eviction, Eleanor found herself standing in front of her old home, a suitcase in hand, the weight of her entire life reduced to a mere 40 pounds of belongings. The sun was warm for an autumn day, but the heat couldn't thaw the chill that had settled in her heart. The world around her had shifted overnight, and for the first time in years, she felt lost, like she no longer belonged anywhere. As she stood there, the neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, eyes following her every move. Mrs. Chen, who had always exchanged polite smiles with Eleanor when they passed on the street, shook her head as she watched her walk down the porch steps. "Poor thing," she murmured under her breath. "At her age, where will she go?" Marcus, the son she had raised, now stood at a distance, watching her leave with a cold expression. Brittany, his wife, was already making plans for a new life in the home that had been Eleanor's for over 3 decades. Their voices were drowned out by the growing sound of the neighbors gossiping, each passing glance a reminder of Eleanor's defeat. The bus ride to the shelter was uneventful. Eleanor sat near the back, looking out the window at the city she had called home for so long. Her hand gripped her suitcase tightly, the worn leather digging into her fingers. She felt a mixture of bitterness and sadness, but more than anything, she felt an overwhelming sense of solitude. She had spent her entire adult life caring for Marcus, and now, at 70 years old, she was alone. She thought about the years spent working double shifts, the sacrifices she made to ensure Marcus had everything he needed, the way she had pushed her own dreams aside to make sure his came true. And now, it was all gone. The house, the family, the future she had envisioned for herself. It had all slipped through her fingers in a single moment. The shelter was a far cry from what Eleanor had been accustomed to. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the scent of stale air. The low hum of fluorescent lights added to the feeling of being in a place that had been forgotten by the world. Rows of folding cots lined the room, each one filled with people who had their own stories of hardship and struggle. Eleanor, however, couldn't help but feel as though she didn't belong there, not just because of her age, but because of everything she had hidden from the world. The quiet wealth she had carefully built over the years was now her secret, her only lifeline, and it seemed so far removed from the cold reality of the shelter she now found herself in. Crystal, a woman in her 30s with prematurely aged eyes, sat across from Eleanor on the cot next to Hayes. She had been in the shelter for months, having been kicked out of her home by an abusive boyfriend. Her story, like the others, was one of loss and survival, but Eleanor couldn't help but feel out of place. She had worked so hard to remain invisible, to keep her wealth and success hidden from everyone, and now she was forced to live among strangers who had nothing but their own problems to worry about. "First time?" Crystal asked gently, noticing Eleanor's discomfort. Eleanor nodded silently, unsure of how to respond. "You get used to it," Crystal added. "We all have our reason for being here. You'll be okay." But Eleanor didn't feel okay. She didn't feel like she belonged, not in the shelter, and certainly not in the life she had been forced into. She had spent so many years being invisible to others, hiding in plain sight as a janitor in the wealthy offices of downtown Chicago. She had listened in on conversations, overheard secrets, and made careful investments based on the information she gathered. But now, all of it seemed like a distant memory. The life she had built was tucked away in accounts no one knew about, and yet here she was, forgotten, discarded, and helpless. That night, as she lay in her cot staring at the ceiling, Eleanor realized something. She had been invisible for so long, but maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a greater strength. As the hours passed, she started to think of all the things she could do. She knew how to survive. She had done it for years, building a small fortune while no one noticed. Now, she would have to dig deep, tap into that strength once more, and find a way to reclaim what was hers. Her mind wandered to her business card, the one from Peterson and Associates, the wealth management firm she had worked with in secret. She had always kept it hidden, a symbol of the empire she had built while everyone assumed she was nothing more than a humble janitor. But now, perhaps it was time to call. Time to let go of the secret she had kept for so long. Tomorrow, Eleanor decided she would take the first step in reclaiming her life. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the cold light filtering through the high, narrow windows of the shelter. The sound of the other residents moving about filled the air, some shuffling to the bathroom, others making their beds, their voices low and tired. Despite the discomfort, Eleanor felt strangely calm. A quiet resolve had settled over her during the night, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. She sat up in her cot, her back stiff from the uncomfortable mattress. But her mind was clear. She knew what she had to do. For years, she had hidden behind the mask of invisibility, thinking it was the safest option. But now, she realized the time had come to stop hiding. She had built a small fortune, an empire no one knew about. She had done it quietly, patiently, and most importantly, she had done it for Marcus. But that was over now. Eleanor's fingers brushed against the worn business card in her pocket. Peterson and Associates. The name felt both distant and familiar, like a world she had long ago left behind. She pulled the card out and stared at it for a moment. The company had been discreet, careful, and protective of her identity. She had trusted them to manage her wealth while she played the role of the quiet janitor. But now, as she sat in this sterile shelter room, the wealth she had built was the only thing that could give her the freedom she so desperately needed. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor pulled out her phone, the one possession that still tethered her to the world she once knew. She found the number for Peterson's office and dialed it. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. "Peterson and Associates, how can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone professional yet warm. "This is Eleanor Williams," Eleanor said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I need to speak to Mr. Peterson. It's urgent." There was a brief pause, and then the receptionist's voice softened. "Just a moment, Mrs. Williams." A few seconds later, the line clicked, and a new voice came through, the voice of Mr. Peterson himself. "Eleanor," he said, his tone familiar and welcoming. "I didn't expect to hear from you. How have you been?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided it was time to be honest. "Not well, Mr. Peterson. I've been kicked out of my home. My adopted son has evicted me." Mr. Peterson's voice shifted, concern replacing the casual tone. "I'm sorry to hear that, but you're a strong woman, Eleanor. I know you'll find a way to bounce back." Eleanor swallowed hard, the weight of the words still settling in her chest. "I don't know where to turn, Mr. Peterson. I've spent my life hiding my wealth, thinking it was safer that way. But now, I need to take control of my life again. I need to know what I have, what I built." There was a long pause, and when Peterson spoke again, his voice was calm but filled with understanding. "Eleanor, you've always had a keen eye for opportunity. You've built a small empire, and it's time for you to step into the light. I'll make sure everything is in place. We'll take the next steps carefully, but I believe you've earned a right to be seen for who you truly are." Eleanor felt a rush of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had spent so much of her life in the shadows, believing her quiet existence was the safest choice. But now, the idea of being recognized for her achievements, of no longer hiding, felt like the first step toward reclaiming her dignity. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice stronger now. "Please, make the necessary arrangements. It's time I stopped being invisible." He assured her he would take care of everything and that she would hear from him soon. After hanging up, Eleanor sat for a moment, reflecting on the decision she had just made. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, it seemed filled with possibilities. The world outside the shelter, the one she had once been a part of, no longer felt as distant. The reality of her situation, being homeless, discarded by her own son, was still fresh and painful. But it was also clear to her that she was no longer the woman who would silently endure, silently fade into the background. She had built something powerful, and it was time to let that power work for her, not against her. Later that day, Eleanor stepped outside the shelter, the crisp air biting her skin. The city bustled around her, but she felt oddly out of place. She walked with purpose, feeling the weight of a decision she had just made and the anticipation of what lay ahead. She had always been a survivor, but now, for the first time, she would survive on her own terms. Her next move was to find a place where she could stay for a while, something temporary but safe. Eleanor didn't want to be dependent on anyone. Not Marcus, not the shelter, not anyone. She wanted to be self-sufficient again, to feel like she was in control of her life. As she walked, she thought about the life she had left behind. The small, modest house she had raised Marcus in, the sacrifices she had made, and the quiet strength that had carried her through all these years. She thought about the neighbors, who had seen her as nothing more than a quiet, humble woman. She wondered what they would think if they knew the truth, that she wasn't just a cleaning lady, but a woman with wealth, intelligence, and a lifetime of untold stories. Eleanor knew that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time, the world would know her for who she truly was. As the days passed, Eleanor settled into a small, modest apartment she had rented with the help of a friend from the shelter. It wasn't much, bare walls, simple furniture, but it was Hayes, and that small fact brought a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. The apartment was quiet, far away from the noisy streets of downtown Chicago, but close enough that she could feel the pulse of the city. It was the kind of place where she could gather her thoughts and make the decisions that would shape the rest of her life. Eleanor spent her mornings with her phone in hand, contacting Peterson and associates, making sure everything was set up. She spoke with Mr. Peterson regularly, confirming that all her investments were secure, that her wealth, carefully hidden for decades, was still intact. He assured her it was, but Eleanor couldn't help but feel a tinge of doubt. It was strange to think about her wealth as something she had to manage and protect. For so many years, it had been a secret, buried under layers of everyday life. But now, it was a ticket to freedom. She also spent hours going over old records and letters she had kept in a safe deposit box, papers from the early days of her investments, old contracts, deeds of property scattered across the city and beyond. As she pored over the documents, she realized just how much she had accumulated without anyone knowing. In the quietest corners of her life, while the world assumed she was just another poor janitor struggling to get by, she had been building something far greater. Her investments in stocks had paid off. Her real estate ventures, carefully planned and executed, had appreciated in value. There were bonds, mutual funds, and a series of smart financial decisions that had grown over the years into an empire she had never once shared with anyone. The portfolio before her was worth over $100 million. The realization hit her all at once. This wasn't just a small fortune. This was a wealth that could change everything. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a life where she was in control, not just of her financial future, but of her entire life. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. She had the power to rewrite her story, to take back what was rightfully hers. But there was still the matter of Marcus. He had kicked her out. He had betrayed her in the worst way. But he was her son, and that bond was hard to break. Eleanor had loved him with everything she had, and the hurt from his actions still lingered in her heart. Despite everything, she couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to make him see her for who she really was, not just a woman who had raised him, but the woman who had built her own success in silence, in the shadows. Eleanor knew what she had to do. She had been silent for too long. It was time to confront Marcus. It was time to show him what she had kept hidden all these years. But this time, it would be on her terms. With a sense of purpose, Eleanor called Peterson. "I need you to set up a meeting," she told him. "I want Marcus to know who I really am." Mr. Peterson didn't question her decision. "We'll handle it, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with a quiet confidence. "It's time for you to take control." Later that week, Eleanor found herself back in her former neighborhood. The house where Marcus had grown up, where she had poured all her love and energy into raising him, stood before her. It was the same house, but everything felt different now. She wasn't the same woman who had once worked tirelessly to keep things together. Now, she was someone else, a woman who had built her own legacy, a woman who refused to remain invisible any longer. Marcus was at the door when she arrived. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and discomfort, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She had come to confront him, and she wouldn't back down. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Marcus asked, his voice cautious, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. "I'm here to talk," Eleanor replied, her voice calm but firm. "We need to have a conversation about what happened." He shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Brittany was inside, no doubt preparing for some event or social gathering, not even aware of the gravity of the situation. "I've already told you everything, Eleanor," Marcus said, his tone flat. "What more do you want from me?" Eleanor's heart ached at the coldness in his voice, but she pressed on. "I want you to understand who I am. I'm not just a woman who raised you. I'm not just some old woman who needed your charity. I built something of my own." For the first time, Marcus looked at her with something resembling confusion. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out the folder, the one that contained all the proof of her wealth, the documents, the investments, the deeds. She placed them in front of him, watching as his eyes scanned the pages in disbelief. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rising. "Where did all this come from?" "This," Eleanor said quietly, "is my life. This is what I built. I've worked for it, sacrificed for it. I didn't need you to take care of me, Marcus, I've been taking care of myself for years. The shock on his face was palpable. He looked at the papers, then back at her, unsure of what to say. I didn't know, he stammered. You've been hiding all of this. I had to, Eleanor replied. I did it to protect you, to protect us both. But now, it's time you knew the truth. There was a long silence as Marcus processed the information. The house, the money, the life Eleanor had built, all of it was suddenly out in the open. And Eleanor realized that she wasn't just confronting Marcus. She was confronting her past, her fears, and the invisible strength she had hidden for so long. I never wanted to be a burden, Eleanor continued. But you need to understand, Marcus, I'm not the woman you think I am. I'm not weak. I'm not invisible. Marcus stood there, speechless, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about everything she had given, everything she had done for him. The reality of his actions, of how he had treated her, seemed to be hitting him now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. I didn't realize. I didn't understand. Eleanor looked at him, her heart still heavy but her spirit strong. It's time to make things right, Marcus. And it's time for you to see me for who I truly am. The tension in the room was thick, almost palpable. Marcus stood there, his face a mix of confusion and regret, staring down at the papers that Eleanor had laid out before him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed unsure of himself. The man who had once held so much power over her, the one who had cast her out without a second thought, was now standing in front of her, humbled. But Eleanor couldn't tell if the regret in his eyes was real, or if it was just the shock of the revelation. How could you not tell me, Mom? Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. All these years. Why didn't you tell me? I thought. He stopped, running his hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. I thought you needed me. I thought I was the one supporting you. But you've been fine this whole time. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to find a word to explain something that had been buried deep inside her for so long. When she opened her eyes again, she met Marcus's gaze. I did it for you, Marcus. For both of us. You were a child when I took you in. I wanted you to have the best life possible, to have every opportunity that I never had. So, I kept things hidden. I didn't want you to feel like you had to take care of me. You were supposed to focus on your life, on your future. But you didn't have to do it alone. Marcus's voice cracked, his face showing the frustration he had held inside for so long. You should have trusted me. I could have helped. I would have helped if I had known. Eleanor shook her head, the years of silence and isolation weighing on her. It wasn't about trust, Marcus. It was about not wanting to be a burden. I thought if you knew the truth, it would change everything. I didn't want to be seen as someone who was just living off of your success, off of your generosity. I wanted to earn my own way. I wanted to be someone who didn't need anyone, even if that meant keeping the truth hidden. Marcus opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. He was struggling, trying to come to terms with everything that had been laid out in front of him. The wealth, the investments, the life Eleanor had built in secret. It was all too much for him to process in one moment. He had assumed, for so long, that Eleanor was just a simple woman who had raised him out of love, never imagining there was so much more beneath the surface. For the first time, Eleanor felt the weight of his eyes on her, not as his mother, but as a woman who had lived her own life, made her own decisions, and created something far greater than he had ever known. The realization made her feel both empowered and vulnerable, standing there in front of him, no longer hiding behind the mask of humility she had worn for so long. Marcus, you need to understand something, Eleanor said, her voice firm now, no longer wavering. I never wanted to live off of you. I never wanted to rely on you. I wanted you to know me as a woman who could take care of herself, who could build her own future. And I did that. I built a life, quietly, without asking for anything in return. But now, I need you to understand why I did it, and why I kept it from you. Marcus took a step back, rubbing his face with his hands. I don't know what to think right now, he said, his voice sounding lost. I can't believe all of this. I just can't believe it. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of the situation. She had come here for closure, for answers, but most of all, she had come here to let Marcus see her for who she truly was. It was not about the money, not about the wealth, but about the years of sacrifice, the life she had lived quietly, out of sight. "I never asked for your pity, Marcus," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime. "I never wanted you to feel sorry for me. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had or didn't have. That's why I kept it hidden. I thought if you knew, it would change the way you saw me, the way you saw everything I had done for you. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you didn't need to know the truth to love me. Maybe you just needed to see me for who I am." Marcus took a deep breath, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice breaking. "I've hurt you so much, Eleanor. I've been selfish. I've been blind." Eleanor didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to say everything would be okay, that they could fix it, that they could go back to being a family. But another part of her knew that things couldn't go back to what they were. Too much had happened. Too many words had been said. The trust they had once shared had been broken. "You can't fix this, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice steady but full of sorrow. "But you can learn from it. You can choose to be a better person, a better son, a better husband. But that doesn't mean I'm going to forget how you treated me. And it doesn't mean I'm going to forgive you right away. I need time. And so do you." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "I understand, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Eleanor looked at him one last time, her heart heavy but her mind clear. "I hope you do, Marcus. But remember this, love isn't just about taking care of someone when it's easy. It's about being there when it's hard. And you failed me when it was hard." With that, she turned and walked away. The weight of the conversation lingered, but there was something else in her heart now, a sense of finality, of acceptance. Marcus would have to make his own choices, but Eleanor was done hiding. She was done being the silent woman in the background. She had made her choice. It was time to take her life back. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor's life began to settle into a routine. The apartment she had rented was small, but it was hers. She spent her time focusing on her next steps, organizing her finances, and speaking with Mr. Peterson regularly about her wealth and investments. She had made a decision to stop hiding, and each day that passed, she felt a little more like herself again. The weight of being invisible had lifted, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt the stirrings of freedom. But even with her newfound strength, there was still something unsettling. The events with Marcus weighed heavily on her heart. She had expected him to be different, to understand, to see her for the woman she truly was. But instead, his reaction had been a mixture of confusion and self-pity. He was still her son, and deep down, she wanted him to realize what he had done, to understand the full impact of his actions. But she also knew that he had to come to that realization on his own. She couldn't make him see the truth. That was something only he could do. In the meantime, Eleanor turned her focus to something she had long neglected, herself. The years of sacrifice, the constant hustle to ensure Marcus had everything he needed, had left little room for her own personal growth. Now, in a quiet apartment, she had the chance to reflect, to think about what she truly wanted for the future. Her phone buzzed one morning, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from Mr. Peterson. "We finalized everything. Your assets are secure, and the next steps are in place. Let me know when you're ready to discuss your options." Eleanor smiled as she read the message. There was a sense of accomplishment in those words. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She wasn't just a mother who had been taken advantage of. She was a woman who had built something powerful, something that could change her life and the lives of others. She dialed Peterson's number. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice filled with purpose. "I'm ready. I want to take the next steps. It's time for me to step out of the shadows and make my presence known. I want to use my wealth, my success, for something greater than myself." Mr. Peterson's tone was pleased, but there was a hint of curiosity. "What do you have in mind, Eleanor?" "I'm not sure yet," she said honestly, "but I know that I can make a difference. I've been silent for so long, living in the background, but I can't keep doing that. I've worked too hard, and I've seen too much to stay invisible. It's time to use this wealth to create change, to help those who've been overlooked, who've been silenced like I was." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Peterson spoke. "That's exactly the kind of mindset we've been waiting for, Eleanor. You've got the power to make a real impact. We'll help you set everything in motion." Eleanor's heart swelled with determination. The plan was beginning to take shape. She didn't just want to sit on her wealth and watch the world pass by. She wanted to invest in people, in communities, in causes that would give others the opportunity to thrive. She wasn't going to let the world forget about her, and she wasn't going to let others be forgotten either. But as she began to prepare for the next chapter of her life, one thing continued to nag at her mind. Marcus. She knew she couldn't stay silent forever. She had made it clear that their relationship was fractured, that the trust they once shared had been shattered. But could they ever repair it? Was there a way to find forgiveness, not just for him, but for herself? It was a question she didn't have the answer to yet. In the meantime, Eleanor decided to visit the shelter where she had once stayed. She had been giving back to the community in small ways, volunteering her time and resources when she could, but she wanted to see how the people there were doing. She had been one of them, after all, quietly struggling, quietly surviving. She hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be invisible, to be judged without anyone knowing your true worth. When she arrived at the shelter, Crystal was there, along with several other residents. They had seen Eleanor's transformation, how she had gone from being the quiet woman who never complained to someone who was actively making a difference. Crystal's face lit up when she saw her. "You're back," Crystal said with a smile. "I didn't expect to see you here again, but I'm glad you came." Eleanor nodded, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "I wanted to check on all of you, see how things were going." The conversation turned to the difficulties of living in the shelter, the hardships of being homeless, and the challenges they all faced. But as Eleanor listened, she realized something important. The people in this shelter weren't just the forgotten or the invisible. They were survivors. They were fighters. They had dreams, hopes, and potential, just like she had, and she could help them realize those dreams. It was a realization that gave her even more clarity about her mission. She wasn't just going to help the rich or the powerful. She wasn't going to make donations to causes that didn't align with her values. No, Eleanor was going to help those who had been overlooked by society, those who had been left behind. She would start by creating a foundation, one focused on helping the elderly, homeless, and disenfranchised, giving them the tools, the opportunities, and the dignity they deserved. Eleanor left the shelter that day with a renewed sense of purpose. She was going to make her wealth count. She was going to help others rise, just like she had risen from the shadows. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As the weeks went on, Eleanor's life took shape in ways she hadn't anticipated. With the help of Peterson and Associates, she began putting her newfound wealth to work. The plans for her foundation were taking form, and she felt the weight of purpose slowly replacing the burden of shame and silence that had held her down for so long. Her foundation would focus on providing services and resources to the elderly, the homeless, and those who had been pushed aside by society, just like she had been. But despite her growing sense of accomplishment, Eleanor couldn't shake the thoughts of Marcus. She had tried to focus on her work, her mission to give back, but his face lingered in her mind. She had made the choice to cut him off, to walk away from the son who had betrayed her. But the more time passed, the more Eleanor realized that healing would never be complete without some resolution between them. One day, while she was reviewing documents for her foundation, Eleanor received a text message. It was from Marcus. "Can we talk? Please. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize how wrong I was. I need to apologize, and I want to make things right." Eleanor stared at the message for a long time, the weight of a decision sitting heavily in her chest. She had spent weeks building her new life, strengthening her resolve, but Marcus's words made her question if she could truly move forward without some kind of closure. She had always taught him about forgiveness, about the power of second chances. But this was different. This wasn't a small mistake. This was a betrayal, a moment that had shattered her trust in him completely. And yet, deep down, Eleanor knew she couldn't hold on to the anger forever. If she wanted to truly heal, if she wanted to fully reclaim her life, she needed to find a way to forgive. not just for Marcus's sake, but for hers as well. After much thought, Eleanor sent a reply. I'll meet you tomorrow, 2 p.m., same place. The next day, Eleanor arrived at a small coffee shop where she had agreed to meet Marcus. She sat at a table by the window, watching the world go by. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. She had made peace with her decision to step into the light, to stop hiding her strength. And now, she was about to face her son again, not as a woman who had raised him, but as someone who had built her own path. When Marcus walked into the cafe, Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. He looked different, worn, as though the weight of what had happened had finally taken its toll. His eyes were red, and there was a hesitance in his step, as if he wasn't sure how to approach her after everything that had transpired. "Mom," he said quietly as he sat down across from her, "I've been so stupid. I never understood what you'd been doing, what you had been hiding. I was so focused on myself that I didn't see you." Eleanor looked at him, her heart heavy but not unforgiving. "You were angry, Marcus. I get it. You were upset because you thought I needed you. You thought you had to take care of me. But I never wanted that. I wanted you to live your life, to build your own future. I wanted you to have everything I didn't. And I thought, in doing so, I would protect you. But I also thought I had to protect myself from being seen as weak, from being seen as someone who couldn't make it on her own." Marcus ran his hands over his face, looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. "I thought I was helping you," he said, his voice shaky. "I thought I was doing the right thing by taking care of you, by doing what I thought was best for you. But I see now that I was wrong. I was selfish. I took you for granted. You sacrificed everything for me, and I never even understood it. I took the house away from you, the home you built with your own hands, and I didn't even see what I was doing until it was too late." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the knot in her chest begin to loosen. "You've always had a good heart, Marcus. But sometimes we lose sight of what matters when we get caught up in the moment. What matters now is how we move forward. It's not about the house or the money. It's about what you've learned, about the kind of man you want to be from this point on." Marcus looked at her, his face full of regret. "I don't know if I can make up for what I've done. I don't even know where to begin. But I want to. I want to make things right." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand on his. For the first time in a long while, she saw the boy she had raised, the boy who had once looked up to her with admiration, who had trusted her with his life. "You can start by being honest with yourself, Marcus, by taking responsibility for your actions. But it's not just about saying sorry. It's about showing up day after day and proving that you've learned it, proving that you're willing to do the work, to change. And if you do that, you learn my forgiveness, not just from me, but from yourself." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes still filled with tears. "I will, Mom. I swear I will." Eleanor smiled, a soft, sad smile. "I know you will, Marcus. I know you will. But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about you, too. You have to forgive yourself for what happened. Only then can we move forward." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their conversation hung in the air, but there was something else there now, a sense of understanding, of healing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was much work to be done on both sides, but in that moment, Eleanor knew that something had shifted. She wasn't the woman who had quietly suffered anymore. She wasn't the invisible woman she had once been. And Marcus, in his own way, was beginning to find his way back to her. As they parted ways that afternoon, Eleanor felt something new stir in her heart. A glimmer of hope for the future, a recognition that forgiveness wasn't always about letting go. It was about making room for something new, something better. The weeks that followed were a mix of healing and reflection. Eleanor's new life was taking shape, and with it, the foundation she had always dreamed of. The Invisible Strength Foundation, named after the quiet strength she had carried all those years, was becoming reality. She had already started partnering with local shelters, hospitals, and senior care facilities. The elderly, the homeless, and those on the margins of society were often invisible to the world, but Eleanor was determined to change that. She would be their advocate, their voice. But there was still one thing left to do. One final chapter to write in her story. The foundation was well on its way to making a difference, but Marcus had begun to change too. Eleanor noticed the small steps he was taking to rebuild their relationship. He was volunteering with her, spending time with the elderly, and working with the homeless in the same shelters where Eleanor had once been. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Marcus struggled, but he was trying, and that was enough. One evening, as Eleanor sat at a desk, reviewing the latest project proposals, Marcus knocked gently on the doorframe of her office. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tentative but sincere. Eleanor looked up from her papers and smiled softly. "Of course. Come in." Marcus entered, closing the door behind him. He took a seat across from her, running his hand through his hair, his gaze flickering nervously. It had been a few weeks since their last conversation, and Eleanor could see the change in him. He wasn't the same man who had evicted her from her home. He was trying, and that was what mattered. "I wanted to apologize again," Marcus began, "for everything, for how I treated you, for not seeing you for who you are. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to be better." Eleanor placed a pen down on the desk and leaned forward, her eyes warm but serious. "I see it, Marcus. I see the effort you're making. It's not about saying sorry anymore. It's about what you do moving forward. You're showing up, and that's all I can ask for." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with both regret and hope. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the part about forgiveness. I don't know if I can ever truly forgive myself for what I did, but I'm trying. I'm working on it. I want to make it right, Mom." Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion. She could see the man he was becoming, the man she always knew was inside of him. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. "You're on the right path, Marcus," Eleanor said softly. "Just keep going, one step at a time. That's all you can do." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. Then Marcus stood up and walked over to Eleanor, offering her a small, tentative smile. "I know I've got a long way to go, but I want to be a part of your life, Mom. I want to be a part of this." He gestured to the foundation plans and documents scattered across her desk. "I want to help. I want to give back, the way you've given to me." Eleanor stood up too, her heart filled with a quiet joy. She had worked so hard to build something for others, but to see Marcus standing there, offering to help, offering to be part of the change he had started, it was everything she had hoped for. "I'd love that," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You don't have to do it all at once, Marcus. But if you want to help, I could use you. This foundation is about more than just giving money or resources. It's about showing people they matter, that they are seen, that they are not invisible anymore, and that's something you can be a part of." Marcus smiled, the weight in his eyes lifting a little. "I'm ready." As Eleanor watched him leave the room, her heart swelled with pride. This wasn't the same Marcus who had kicked her out of her home. This was a new man, a man who was starting to understand the value of hard work, compassion, and the importance of family. It would take time, but Eleanor believed in him. She believed in both of them. In the coming months, Eleanor's foundation grew even stronger. The project she had started flourished, and the people they helped began to see their lives change. She wasn't just a quiet woman hiding in the shadows anymore. She was a woman who had taken control of her destiny, who had fought for herself and for others, and who had built something that would outlive her. Marcus continued to volunteer at the shelters, working with the elderly and the homeless, slowly gaining their trust and respect. He had learned the true meaning of family, of kindness, and of respect. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. 1 year after their fateful conversation at the coffee shop, Marcus stood beside Eleanor at a charity gala for the foundation. The evening was a success, with donations pouring in from across the city to support their work. As they posed for a photo together, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for Marcus, too. He was no longer the man who had evicted her from her home. He was a man who had found his way back, who had learned the value of humility and love. Eleanor looked at Marcus, her heart full. "We did it," she whispered, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new legacy. A legacy of compassion, of strength, and of family. And as they stood there, Side by side, Eleanor knew one thing for sure. She had never truly been invisible. Her strength, her love, her legacy, it had always been there, waiting to be seen.